let me get on here to verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So Jesus was crucified for us, as those who partake in his divine nature when we put our trust and our lives, everything we have under his divine rulership. We are made from something that is dead in the spirit into something alive. We have been crucified with Christ. Our old nature no longer is alive, and Christ is the one who lives in us. Christ, as Paul says here, Christ lives in me. Even though we are still in the flesh, still in flesh and bone bodies, that is, we are supposed to live by faith in the Son of God, who loved us so much that he died and gave himself for all who would come. And yet, though he died for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of brothers and sisters born again through the Spirit, other Christians, he still would have done it if it was just me who would come to him and nobody else. So we see that the life, and that's an important distinction to make when Paul says, "And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." Keep that in mind when you read that, because that's so important, you know. And similarly, you know, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. You see that all the time with people who really get born again. You see them, and suddenly their demeanor changes, and everything that comes out of their mouth changes, and it's marvelous. It's beautiful to see. Chris?
Yeah, very, very powerful. And he says in that verse, "I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." When did Paul die, according to this? Well, when Christ was crucified. Paul has this new life, but it's really not him. It's Christ that is in him, that is functioning through him, and that has changed him from his former sinful self. This suggests a prayer that I consider very important both for the saved and the unsaved. For the unsaved, to ask Jesus to dwell in you and to give you this new life of his direction. And if you are saved, that he will increase his influence in you and to make your life more and more like his. This prayer is one that I consider the answer to pretty much all the problems that we have in this world. Mike?
Good stuff. Good stuff. I couldn't agree more. Verse 21, "I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose." So this is really like the better way. It's a better way, as you know, is mentioned in the New Testament. We as humans do slip and fall sometimes, and yet because of what Christ has done, we are this glorious new creation, where his righteousness is not destroyed on behalf of even as believers our occasionally sinful behavior. Our falling short does not destroy the payment of Jesus Christ. We do not nullify the grace of God because of not following the law. For if this was so, then Jesus' death was extraneous. Our standing before God, for the Lord, is secure, because it is God alone who has the reins of immortality. Paul even mentions this in 1 and 2 Corinthians. And it is God alone who paid our price of reconciliation, giving something greater, that is his life, for something lesser. And yet the writer of Hebrews goes just a bit farther with this, emphasizing our priestly aspect that we inherit as we become part and parcel of these adopted sons in Jesus through the Spirit. There, in chapter 7 of the letter to the Hebrews, verse 11, he writes, "If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, that further need was there? What further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek and not be called after the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which the tribe Moses spake nothing concerning priesthood, and it is yet far more evident, for that after the similitude of Melchizedek there ariseth another priest, who is made, not after the law of a carnal commandment, but after the power of an endless life. So we see that we don't nullify the grace of God, because the righteousness is from Jesus and what he did. We see Paul. That's what Paul is saying here very clearly, and that there was a real reason that Christ died. And in that, when you tie that together with Hebrews, we see that Christ is imputing this righteousness to us, and he's even making us part of this a priesthood that's after the order of Melchizedek, which is really, really interesting. That's all I have for 21. Chris?
Okay. And so it says, do not frustrate the grace of God, for his righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. And that word frustrate there is sort of means annul or invalidate. This Jesus plus attitude, Jesus plus works attitude, really does seek to invalidate the grace of God. Here Paul is concluding this public rebuke of Peter with a sentence that in my mind rung out in that room that they were all eating in for a while, which was, if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. If that is true, then Christ at the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ prayed 3 times saying essentially, if there's another way to pay for these sins, let's take it. Jesus actually sweat blood. This was reported not by a casual observer, but by Luke, who was a physician. And we now know nowadays this condition is actually known as hematidrosis. And it's very rare, but people can actually sweat blood if they're suffering from extreme stress. This is noticed a lot of times with people that are facing their own death. This sweating of blood seems to have happened even after an angel was sent to comfort Jesus during this time of stress. So the angel was sent to comfort him, yet he still was sweating blood. The point that I'm trying to make here is that we really have no capacity to understand what Jesus was about to face. He, however, knew exactly what it would be like to take the wrath of an all-powerful God for the sin that had all the sin that had ever been done by even the most wicked people in history, even yours and mine, that we would commit 2,000 years later. He knew that wrath was his cup to drink the very next day. And his Father had it confirmed to him that there was, in fact, no other way, that he had to drink that cup himself. And this is the greatest proof that righteousness does not come by the law, because if it does, then Christ's prayer that night in that garden was not answered, and his death was in vain. So I'm sure that when Paul said these words to that room, it fell silent as the words sunk in and their error became obvious to them. And that, our friends, is the end of Galatians 2. And so we're about to get into some really meaty stuff with Galatians 3, where he really digs into the Galatians specifically and talks about some of this stuff. So stay tuned for that at verse-by-verse-Bible-teaching.com, where you can download our notes and see videos on YouTube as well. And you can also catch us on iTunes. So be sure to check us out, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
All right. Bye.